Hi everybody, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a Hometown Scrapbook by Ben Weatherwax. Today's story, Sailor Boy. Hello there. Tonight our story is about a ship, a proud ship too, and one that put a lot of water under her keel and knew the four corners of the world as well as Grays Harbor knew her rakish lines. We tell this story first because it's inescapably bound up with the romance of the sea little saltwater ports, and secondly because it's the story of a sailing ship that Grays Harbor knew so well. A ship that was built of clean fir timbers that scampered before the winds like a living thing, that answered to the haul of the taut lines and battened down sails and the twist of a hemp, and that played such an important part in the building of Grays Harbor as a world seaport back in the days of iron men and wooden ships. As late as the hard-handed days of Billy Gould, the Sailor Boy was a proud visitor, and Grays Harbor shipping men knew the Sailor Boy as one of the finest three-masted sailing ships on the coast. She called here many times, tying up at several mills to hand stow her cargo of fur and give her sailormen some weeks ashore to shake off the salt and lose their sea legs. Grays Harbor had a claim to the Sailor Boy that was closer than ever because of her frequency of call. For her builder, the first skipper, was an Aberdeen man, Sam Mitchell. He died here when the 20s were coming in to end one of the saltiest careers in local shipping annals. But he was not with the little schooner when she logged her famous unlucky 13th voyage, and if he had been, he would have cursed the day he laid her keel. For few stories of ships that ever went to sea from here can equal the tale of the Sailor Boy's fate at the hands of the potent and unlucky number 13. The log of the Sailor Boy contains more adventures and misadventures than usually befell most ships in a lifetime. The three-masted schooner Sailor Boy was laid down in South Beach on Willapa Harbor in the year of 1883. It was before they were sawing timber in Aberdeen, and when the only sawdust being made hereabouts came from George Emerson's Northwestern Mill in Hoquiam and the little water-powered plant that hummed up Cosmopolis Way. Yes, laid down in South Bend on Friday the 13th of that year. And it was on the 13th of another month that they greased the ways and let her fell in the lift of salt water for the first time. And from that day on, the unlucky 13 rode at her masthead like a skull and crossbones over a black-handed raider. But the curse didn't make itself felt from the start. In fact, the Sailor Boy had paced the ships of the coast for more than a quarter of a century before she ran afoul with the unlucky number 13. But when it came, it was in showers. It was on Friday the 13th of December 1910 that the Sailor Boy cleared San Francisco Bay outbound for the South Sea. Her skipper flaunted the superstitious of saltwater men and cast off with the dawn of that dreaded day, beating down the harbor for open sea. On December 30th, her troubles began. It started when her clock struck 13 times. An hour later, the sea rose in a raging fury and tore her starboard rigging away, carried her sails, and ripped her spankers to shreds. She limped back into San Francisco, a chastened and wallowing hunk, and refitted from the fore trunk down. And on January 13th, in spite of the warning of saltwater men, she cleared the port outbound and announced her destination as the Fanning Islands, deep in the South Seas. Now, if you're one of those oldsters who can recall the Sailor Boy as she looked clearing Grace Harbor Bar, her mast set a sharp rake, which was the whim at that same time, and a dream of her builder, her schooner rig billowing soft curves of seagoing white, and her nose skimming the blue froth with a leisurely wallow at the big troughs. You'll get a long-remembered picture of this little trimmed vessel as she cleared the Golden Gate and swung towards the Southern Cross. And so plying by and before the trades, she arrived off Fanning on the hapless Friday night when all good ships' clocks should be striking 8 bells. She tolled out the unholy 13 bells. 13 bells at this time. The skipper stomped his salty heels and blew a shower of sparks from his pipe. But it was the ship's cook that had counted the strokes of 13 on this occasion, who was shaking by terror. He deserted ship, slipping over the side to swim ashore, and was never to set foot on the sailor boat's deck again. From Fanning Island, the Sailor Boy laid a tack for Washington Island, arriving off that speck of coral and kelp the night of March 13th. From here, she headed south by west for the Gilberts and lay off the atoll that was known as Tarawa on April 13th. Again and again, the ship's officer wrote the date 13 conspicuously into the Sailor Boy's log, and those who gave head to superstition looked quizzically at the sky for a hurricane and scanned the barometer for any signs of trouble. She did not remain long at the island, but up her hook and sailed on Ocean Island, the capital atoll of the Gilberts, where the High Commissioner of the island ordered her back to Tarawa because her skipper had failed to obtain a license to recruit and trade in the Gilberts. And on another 13th, the 13th of May, she arrived again at the island that was called Tarar. She lay in the lagoon off the tropical atoll, just off a tiny dot shown on the charts as Sand Island, and her crew fished over the side in the crystal clear waters of the lagoon that changed from deep to coral reefs, which little reckoned in that long ago time that it had a conspicuous rendezvous with history. On a Friday, the Sailor Boy followed the blue waters through the reef and headed back for the Fanning. Each midnight now, the ship's clock struck 13, although it was faithful to its call at the 2 other times each day that it struck 8 bells. The schooner was beclammed en route back to Fanning, and it was July 21st, 1910 when she made a landfall off the eye-searing strip of yellow beach where the coral heads loom large at low tide, and flocks of low-skimming birds seemed to race with the sound of the surf, dipping and swooping as they reach above the waters. The winds were negligible. A 10-knot tide pulled and hauled the ship, finally carrying her high onto the beach where she rested for 13 days. Her crew fought the drift, but men-pulled sweeps were nothing to the suck of a tidal pull, and while backs bent over the oars and her skipper used every art in his long experience, she was beached like a floating log for 1 day less than 2 weeks. When the crew succeeded in freeing her with the high tide that floated her up from the sand, there was just enough wind to carry her off the reef and into clear water, and her skipper hightailed it for Honolulu. Her voyage had been a total loss. Her owners were sick of their bargain. Her skipper reread the log and cursed his luck and toted up 11 successive events that happened on the 13th, before she rested her rank high on the beaches and reached finally the safety of Honolulu. And that began the end of the sailor boy. Her crew quit her. Her skipper looked for another bottom, and her owner sold her and converted her to a barge ship. Disgraced, shorn at her rake sticks and billowing canvases, the old schooner, once the pride of the lumber run, barged coal and pineapples between the islands and San Francisco, and her end in Honolulu Harbor, she fell victim to a wrecker's hammer. And there will be those amongst the old-timers who will recall the sailor boy, sleek and trim, putting out from the northwestern mill a cargo of lumber, captained by her builder and her son, Shuley Mitchell, and went making a mark in the eye's memory as she started down the harbor again to be recognized by everyone. The sailor boy putting out today would be the word passed along the waterfront, which meant an on-schedule run down to Frisco and an on-schedule reappearance of the little ship that they had known to fill the salt water before there was such towns as Hoquiam and Aberdeen, and before her builder quit the saltwater trade to run a grocery store in Aberdeen, and the shifts of emphasis from weighing anchor to weighing sugar away back there when the century was young. Well, the sailor boy is one of the hosts of the saltwater ships that have sailed away from here never to return. Like any seaport where there are comings and goings, a share of them don't come back each time, and before you can check up on them, they're rescattered through the waters all over the face of the earth. Take the Forest Dream. She was one of the 3 ships constructed at the Grays Harbor Motor Shipyard just after the First World War, bearing a similar name. The Forest Pride, Forest Friend, and one that they were going to talk about, the Forest Dream, was a sky yarder local to the boat builder craftsman who worked on her, one of the finest ships ever launched on the coast. Her frames at the bilges were reinforced with steel, and into her went the know-how of Grays Harbor shipbuilders for more than 30 years of building saltwater vessels. She was a 1,600-ton barkentine rig, but she was about to last for her kind, and there was no luck of the sea ahead for her, slipping down into her ways from the Aberdeen yards in the early months of an uneasy peace that followed World War I. The Forest Dream wandered a bit aimlessly before she was seized for credit a long overdue while in the harbor at Sydney, Australia. She was acquired by a Swedish shipping firm and had a short but active career in the Atlantic service before she was laid up in Strömstad, Sweden. There, on January 15, 1933, a crazed fisherman set a fire, and although her crew fought the blaze with every means at their hands, the Forest Dream burned for 3 days to the water's edge. Starting in the paint locker, it was never under control, and the good clear fur of her ribs and the planking fed the flames that could be seen at night for miles. A Swedish newspaper reported the fire in the article that were received in Grays Harbor. The local residents can still recall the feeling of pride in the harbor-built ship, and when they read the Swede's appraisal of her worth, the article credited the Forest Dream with enough wood to build 50 houses, and spoke of her fine lines and tight construction. And so she should have been, a ship with the lines borrowed from the host of the finest and swiftest ships to cleave the brine of the Pacific. For Grays Harbor shipbuilders boasted the tradition of the finest work and the finest shipbuilders that have ever known their products or sailed. And few were the remote corners of the world where the keel laid on Grays Harbor did not venture. But it was the story of these ships and the men who sailed them that spread their color of romance over the lusty sailing ports of the early years of this century to make them all and every one our years of sea and men who knew it, and the years to recount in countless ways here in our hometown scrapbook. Thanks for listening.